Let's Fix Robert. It's the 21st episode of the 5th season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Halvorson, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. It's a decent episode. It starts off down at the restaurant, and Debra is there with Amy, and Amy is very curious to see what Stefania looks like, and she sees Stefania. And Stefania is so sweet. Stefania had no idea about Amy, and she said all of the right things, and suddenly they realise they both have something in common. They both hate Robert. And Robert finds out about this, partly because Ray was getting pizza, and they kind of attacked the pizza, and Ray tells him what happened. Robert's not feeling great. He goes over to Marie's to get some comfort food, and unusually, Marie doesn't give him any food because she's kind of in the middle of something, and we get a little bit of suspense for a couple of seconds as we wonder what Marie could be doing that's more important to her than feeding her son. Well, we find out. She takes Robert through to the front room, and she's there with Amy and Stefania. And they're basically there to try and find out what's wrong with Robert. Because obviously Marie, maybe her heart's in the right place. She wants to find out what's wrong with him, if there's anything wrong with him, so that he can, in theory, fix that and actually find somebody he wants to spend the rest of his life with. And then Judy arrives, which I love. I think Judy is such a funny character. And she's there. She's been invited there because she spends a lot of time with Robert, so she might be aware of things he does that might be off-putting to other people. And they are really ganging up on him. And on the one hand, yes, it is very funny. But at the same time, it's a really uncomfortable situation for Robert. And I think he responds in a way that's very believable. That's very realistic. Yes, that's funny, but also it's a little annoying that they decided to do this for Robert, not for Robert, I guess to Robert, as a fan of Robert, and generally we only see the good that he does. We don't often see that many negative qualities in Robert. There are some, but generally, if we're in a room with all of the other people, Robert is usually either the voice of reason or the person who's making the most rational decisions. Not always, but generally. So for people to be constantly pointing out these flaws, it's a little different. And it is, as I said, a little funny, but also a little harsh as well. And he goes over to Ray and Debra's, and Ray tries to comfort him. And he tells him, there'll be the right woman out there for you. Debra doesn't believe this. She does not believe this at all, and kind of thinks that Robert has made things the way they are because of himself, and that there's nobody out there who's going to be perfect, and he has to stop seeing these flaws in people. And as soon as she's attacking him, which I guess is what she's doing, he says to her, I believe you're looking for the meeting across the street, which I found quite funny. And she said, nobody's perfect. And without missing a beat, Robert responds, you are. And it's silence. It is so awkward. And Debra is shocked by this because she was basically just saying all of these horrible things to Robert. And he turns around and says that she's perfect. And not in an evil kind of, you think you're so perfect kind of way. It genuinely sounded like he meant it. Do I think Robert is romantically interested in Debra? No, I just think he wants what Ray has. Not just because everybody loves Raymond, but because from his outside perspective, Debra is the perfect wife. Yes, she nags Ray, but she's also very loving. She keeps house, maybe not to Marie's quality, but she does. She sometimes goes out to work, as we've seen. She's very ambitious in that regard. So she has a lot to offer, and generally she's not a nasty person. And I guess that is a version of perfect. And Debra says to Ray, well, she says to Robert, I'm not perfect, and then tell him, Ray. And Ray immediately responds, is this a trap? Which I loved. And Robert then, to kind of backtrack, and he said, no, I meant she's perfect for you. Which, in a way, I think he maybe did mean to some degree. And he has to prove he's not in love with Debra, so he starts insulting her by saying all of these things that make her imperfect, which I thought was funny, but mean. But also Debra had just said a bunch of things to him as well. So it was a very fun, very well written, very well executed bit of dialogue there. Definitely really thoroughly enjoyed it. And then at the very end, Robert goes over to Marie and they have a really brief but lovely heart-to-heart. And then he sits down and she starts trimming his ear hair, which was one of the complaints that Stefania and Amy and possibly Judy had as well. So it's an interesting episode. I think that Robert might take some positive from it. He could take something positive from it, in that maybe he can finally acknowledge that he is the problem. Not because he's a bad person, but because he keeps seeing flaws in people and focusing too much on that. Nobody is perfect, but you can't just focus on the flaws. And unfortunately, it's very clear that I think out of his fear of commitment, this is my opinion, out of Robert's fear of commitment, he is focusing on the flaws as a kind of way out of the relationship, which is not healthy, and it's never going to result in any kind of long-term happiness. So he does have a lot of things to work on. Is it fixing Robert? I think it's nobody else's business to fix him, but I think there are things with himself that he does need to work on, that he does need to, quote-unquote, fix. So some good food for thought, particularly if you are the Robert of this situation. And ultimately, despite the fact that I don't love the idea of fixing Robert, Let's Fix Robert is still a really good episode of Everybody Loves Raymond.